open up your Bibles with me, if you would, to Numbers chapter 14. Numbers chapter 14. I'm going to call today's message, if you're taking notes, I want you to write this down. What did I miss? What did I miss? If you don't like that title, you can listen to the message. You can pick your own title at the top of your notes at the end of it. But I'm going to go with what did I miss? And it picks up in Numbers chapter 14, where Moses and Aaron have sent 12 spies to scout out the land, to scout out the promised land. And so he picks leaders from among them, and 10 of the spies, they come back and they're pretty discouraged. They come back and they talk about that there's giants in the land and that they have fortified cities, so the walls are built up. So it's actually going to be a really difficult, maybe even impossible land to really overthrow. And then two of the guys, like there's two of these guys in every group, right? You know, like the optimistic people, like no matter what, you know, it's like there could be like a flood, but they would find a way to grab a surfboard. They just, you know, people that they just have a way of just, they're optimistic. And so Joshua and Caleb show up on the scene and they're excited and they're encouraged. And they're like, but man, there's fruit the size of our heads and it's an incredible, incredible land. Well, as it stands and as it goes, oftentimes we tend to listen to the majority voice, even if the majority voice is negative. So even if the majority voice is negative and lacks faith, we tend to listen to whatever is the loudest. And so that's what takes place. And so the people of Israel, they get this report. And then in verse 14, chapter 1, it says, then all the congregation raised a loud cry and they wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. Isn't leadership awesome? It says the whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all of the assembly of the congregation of the people of Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Hardword, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, I love this, the land which we passed through to spy it out, it is an exceedingly good land. Come on, let's pray together today over the preaching of God's word. God, we ask you to speak today. God, we bend our ear towards heaven and we lean in because, God, we know words from you, they matter. God, they're different, they're set apart. And so, God, as we go through your word today, I pray that we would never miss out on the much that you have for us. God, we love you and we ask you to speak. In Jesus' name, amen and amen. Now, there have been a lot of benefits to our modern age of technology. Wouldn't you agree? Like there's been a lot of benefits to growing up in the day and age where there is such a thing as Uber, right? I think Uber is an absolutely incredible thing, right? You know, whoever would have thought that we would have graduated to the day where we would get in a complete stranger's vehicle and trust them complicitly and get in their car and sit in the back seat while no one else is in the passenger seat and drive down the road, listen to music that they like that we probably don't, and drive in a car and trust them to bring us from point A to point B. However, what a convenient thing that Uber is. Also, smartphones. Smartphones. Isn't it incredible that you can return your email? You can look on Instagram. Like it's amazing how great and better smartphones have made our life. But there's another thing that I think has made all of our lives better, but better like in a really profound way that has really made us better people, and that is Netflix. I believe Netflix has just made our world a better, happier place. And the reality is that even though these technology advancements are great, they do have some downsides, right? They do have some downsides. So for example, one of the downsides of even having a cell phone is that for some reason in today's day and age, think about this for a second, people feel like they have the right and the authority to get your attention and to have your undivided attention anytime they so choose, right? And I know this because sometimes people will ask me, hey, Pastor Andrew, did you get my text message? And I'll go, yeah. And they'll go, well, why didn't you respond? And I'll lovingly go, well, I live in a world where just because you have my phone number doesn't mean that you get my undivided attention any time that is convenient for you. So I'll get back to you when it's comfortable and convenient for me, right? We live in a crazy world. In fact, about a year and a half ago, I made a fundamental decision in my life. I was gonna operate like I don't have a cell phone. So about a year and a half ago, I just decided I'll call people back. Like if it's not an emergency, I'll call people back when I call them back. I'll text them when I text them. I just made a decision because think about this, 15 years ago, we didn't have access to that, right? We had to send out like smoke signals if we wanted to get a hold of somebody, right? We just didn't have access to that. The other thing that's interesting about Netflix that makes kind of life difficult, in fact, it can be summed up in one phrase. So many shows, so little time. Like, isn't that true? So many shows, so little time. Like I always say when I'm talking to somebody and they're selling me on a show. And by the way, different people in your life have different show credibility, right? There are people in your life that when they recommend a show, they have show credibility because of what they have recommended in the past. There are other people that have no show credibility whatsoever because of what they have recommended in the past. But I get kind of anxious when somebody with show credibility says, hey, Drew, man, I got a perfect show for you. I feel the pressure because I'm like, I can't even keep up with the shows that I'm watching now. In fact, there will be times where it has been so long since I've watched one of my shows that I don't even remember what has taken place in the show. Come on, you ever do that? Like you feel like you got to go back the whole season and watch the whole first season to even remember what happened in the second season? By the way, this is why I think network television has an advantage on Netflix. Now, there's not lots of places where network television has an advantage, but it is in this place. And it's because of what network television does the first minute and a half of every show. What do? Previously on whatever the show you're watching. And that is just a great reminder because for that minute and a half, it reminds you of things that you have forgotten since the last time that you've watched the show. And what the networks instinctively know is this, is that if you want to fully experience what you're about to experience, you need to remember what has taken place. And I would dare say that the exact same is true of life. I think oftentimes in life, we forget just what God has brought us from. I think we forget kind of how far along God has brought us on in the journey, and we need like a little reminder that says previously in the life of you. Where people and God, by the way, that's why being at church is so important and reading the Bible is so important and being in a city group is so important. Why? Because you need people in your life that can remind you that God is better than sometimes we think he is. And that God has done more than we even realize that he is doing. This is why church and these experiences are so important. However, it is so key to not forget where you have come from because it is one way that we get confidence to step into the future of what God has for us. However, we have to stay awake. Because did you know this? Every moment in your life matters, but not every moment in your life matters equally. So it all matters. Every moment matters. Every day you get up and go to work, it matters. Everything you're doing, everything matters. However, not every decision, not everything matters equally. In fact, if you and I were to go out and get coffee or go get lunch right after this, and I were to just say, hey, tell me about your life, tell me about yourself, it would stand to reason that if you started from the beginning and worked your way up until now, you would probably have a lot of days that had taken place in the course of your life. However, if you were to tell the story of your life would probably hinge on about 3 or 4 or 5 key, distinct moments that made all the difference in your life. And that's where you would focus your emotion, and that's where you would focus your time, and that's where you would focus your energy as you told the story of your life. I remember I had one of those moments in my life, and I must have been kind of 19, 20 years old, and I just signed a basketball scholarship at a college, and I was, before I went off to school, you know, even if you're kind of a full ride athlete, there are still other expenses that you have to pay for. You still have to pay for gas, and you still have to pay for different things of that nature. And I was talking to my parents, and have you ever had something that springs up, like you didn't know you were bitter about something, and it has a way of springing up? Like anybody? That's just me, never mind, you guys are all good, right? But you've had moments where you're like, whoa, I didn't realize I had issues about that. So my whole life, I'm 19, 20 years old at this time, I never thought I had like father issues. Like I never thought of myself as a person that has like, Drew, I am your father. Like I never thought I had things like that. And my mom had me, and she was a single mom. And when I was about 8, 9 years old, the man that she married adopted me. And so I have his last name, and he really became my dad. So I always felt like, man, I had a dad. I don't really have those issues. However, there's always key things in conversations at heated moments that have a way of coming up and exposing some bitterness that resides in us. And I remember I was talking to my parents, this is before I went out to college, and we were talking about expenses that were above and beyond school. And we were talking about my biological dad maybe helping out a little bit. And I said instinctively, didn't even think about it, I just said, well, he hasn't helped me up to this point in my life, so I don't expect him to help me out now. And right when I said it, like both my parents looked at me like, whoa. And then I looked at myself like, hello, unhealthy person, right? Like I was like, whoa, where did that come from? And I felt like in that moment, it wasn't audible, but I felt like that God was calling me to forgive my biological dad, but not just forgive him in my private, personal time, but to actually have a conversation with my biological dad. And have God ever, you really felt like you were supposed to do it, and you just went, nah. That was one of these moments, right, for me. I was like, nah, that was like me. That wasn't God. That was like, I'm such a good person that I thought about forgiveness. That's not God. That was more me. And so I'm like, no, I'm good. And so I don't do it for a year and a half. Push it off. And every month that went by, I just felt this stronger and stronger sense of, man, if I really want to move on and I want to be the husband I want to be and be the father I want to be and just be the person, the follower of Christ I want to be, I need to reconcile this. And finally, the torment of disobedience became too much to make way for obedience. Sometimes that's the truth of life, huh? So sometimes it's just the torment of not doing what God's called you to do. Finally, it's so overwhelming. You're like, I have to do what God has told me to do. So I remember I invited my biological dad to our Easter services at the church I was at, and we walked to his car. I remember sitting in his car. And kind of starting the conversation by going, hey, I don't know what it would feel like to have a child that I didn't raise. And I don't know the kind of, guilt or regret or maybe even shame that would accompany that. I said, but I do want to let you know that I think the best thing you ever did was sign over those adoption papers so that John could adopt me and so that he could raise me and I could have the same last name as my dad and the man that raised me. And I just want to say that was very selfless of you, and thank you so much for doing that. And I just want to release you from any guilt or shame or any regret that you might have. I'm okay and I'm good. And you could imagine, he lost it. And I lost it. And what I've found to be true about moments like that is you probably have moments like that, or maybe you're even journeying through a moment like that right now. And I really believe this, that there's going to be some really critical moments in your life. And based on what you do is going to dictate the trajectory thereof your life. And what I found to be true after years of pastoring people is this reality, is that much of life is either recovering from a bad decision at an important time, or it's catching great momentum because of a good decision at an important time. So much of life is either recovering after a bad decision at a really critical time, right? And what do we have? We have to recover. God's gracious, but it takes time to recover. Or it's catching momentum after a great decision at a pivotal time. And here's my point. My only point is this, is that destiny will usually be just on the other side of a very pivotal moment. That's why you got to pay attention. That's why you got to have your eyes open, because there's going to be really pivotal times in your life. And the decisions that you make on the other side of these very pivotal moments are going to dictate your destiny. And in Numbers chapter 14, you have the people of Israel that are in a very pivotal moment in the history of this nation, right? They're free. They haven't entered the promised land yet, and they get a bad report in verse 14, right? It says, then all the congregation raised a loud cry. The people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, man, we should have died in Egypt, or we should have died in the wilderness. We get reports all the time. And sometimes we seek out these reports. In fact, whenever I go to CVS, I seek out a report. Every time I go to CVS, I seek out a report, and the report that I seek out is that little blood pressure machine, right? Anybody else, like, you just love it? It's like a game to you. It's like I love this thing, right? I go, and there's like, stick your arm here, press the button, and are you ever afraid, like, is this thing ever gonna stop? Like, is this ever gonna, like, is my arm, like, is this gonna stop? It's like a horror movie to me. I'm like, I don't know if this is gonna stop today. And imagine with me for a second if right after this, we just like all got together, we all carpooled, and we went to CVS, and we just walked in there like, what's up, Grace City's in the building, right? We just went in there, and we're rolling deep, and I said, hey guys, follow me, and we went over to the machine, and I got in there, and I pressed the button. And let's say this time, the results that I got was that my blood pressure was like a little high. Like my blood pressure was a little high. I wonder what you would think if upon receiving that news, I started crying and laying in the fetal position in the middle of CVS. I wonder if some of you would be looking at me like, okay, babe, I think it's time to start looking for another church. Our pastor's a lunatic, right? You would probably call that moment an overreaction. And think about this for a second. The people weren't discouraged by a result, they were discouraged by a report. These people, right, they send the spies into the promised land, and they're not discouraged, and they're not freaking out because of a result. There was no battle that was fought. There was nothing had taken place. They just came back and reported what had happened. They were discouraged by what was reported, not a result. And I want to encourage you, I think sometimes we overreact to reports. I think a lot of times we overreact to things. They're not results, they're just reports. And here's what you have to know. Reports don't set the course of your whole story. They're just a report. It's just where you're at now. It doesn't mean you can't turn it around. It doesn't mean God can't grace it. It doesn't mean that God can't intervene. It doesn't mean that you can't make changes. We are prone to overreaction when it comes to our demise, but I rarely see people prone to overreaction when it comes to their victory. We are instinctively built to go worst case scenario. I think it's part of like our sin nature. We just instinctively go worst case scenario. We just instinctively, we just go that route. Nobody had to teach us to do that. No one had to disciple us to do that. We just instinctively go that way. And I want to be the kind of church that our instinct is faith. That our instinct is good report. That our instinct is not to freak out when things don't all go our way. But this is why it's so important who you hang with, because groupthink will mess you up. It's why it's important who you're around. Who is around you when you're reading your reports will dictate so much of how you read that report. Who is around you when you read the reports of life is going to dictate how you take, because come on, sometimes you ever like read a report, I'm just talking about just in life, you kind of get some news and you're kind of like, okay, that's bad, but it's not like that bad. And someone's like, whoa, that's terrible. And you're like, it is? It is, and all of a sudden they'll get you down a path, not of faith, but of fear. They'll get you down a path that you're like, oh, if I would have read that report with some faith-filled people, it might have played out differently. Groupthink is a funny thing. In fact, it reminds me of Krispy Kreme. Now, I remember the first time I ever heard of Krispy Kreme. We were in the Seattle area and on staff at a church there, and a Krispy Kreme opened up like 45 minutes away. 45 minutes away. And people were losing their mind on some Krispy Kreme. Like people would drive 45 minutes and then sit in a line for an hour for some Krispy Kreme, right? And I was like, I don't really get it. I don't really understand it. And oftentimes if I don't get something, I'll let other people do it. And if I don't do it, because I can't make fun of it if I do it. You know what I mean? So I'm like, oh man, that's crazy you guys would do that. Well, one particular occasion, somebody was like, hey, right? And everybody in our church was like, oh, Krispy Kreme's amazing. And I'm like, okay, I've never had it. Groupthink. And all of a sudden, somebody's like, I'm going to bring you a Krispy Kreme. I'm going to show you. I'm going to bring you a Krispy Kreme. So they bring me a Krispy Kreme. And I take a bite. I got to be honest. This is my reaction. I took a bite. And I went, eh. In fact, you know what it reminded me of? You know what it tasted like? A donut. That's what it reminded me of. I took a bite and I was like, and I even said, you know what this reminds me? You know what this tastes just like? A donut. And I'm thinking, why is everybody freaking out about a donut? Why? Because of groupthink. Because all it takes is like a few people to start freaking out about a donut, and then we all start freaking out about a donut. Can I encourage you? Listen, it's just a report. That's all it is. It is not God. It does not set things in stone. It's just a report. And so come on, let's not kind of read reports and be overly discouraged. Let's read reports with some faith. Let's read reports with some belief. Let's read some reports and say, this isn't the sum total of my destiny. It's not the sum total of who I am. What did I miss? It's just a report, guys. It's just a report. Some of you need to be reminded of that today. It's just a report. It's just a report. It doesn't dictate the totality of your life. And it doesn't dictate how high you're going to be able to go. It's just a report. And then they go on. I love the people of Israel. They're relentless. It says, why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become prey. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. You know what I find true about just people in general? We'll choose leaders that affirm us rather than challenge us. Instinctively, we will always choose leaders that affirm us rather than challenge us. So they're looking for another. They have leaders, and they have, more importantly, a leader that is God. But we always want to look for leaders, and wrong conclusions lead to wrong direction. Wrong conclusions lead to wrong direction. This last week, Christina and I went out to eat with some dear friends of ours, and we're out to eat. And on the way home, Christina and I got into a fight. Now, Christina doesn't like to use the word fight, so we got into a debate/discussion on the way home, right? And so we get in this discussion on the way home, and she was upset at me because apparently she thought I was saying something that I didn't know that I was communicating. I didn't know. So apparently what she said is, she goes, why did you tell me at the dinner to be quiet and stop talking? And I was like, first of all, I know better. I'm not a rookie at this thing, okay? I go, second of all, when did I say that? Like, when did I say that? She goes, well, there was multiple times, like when you put your hand on the small of my back. You were shushing me. And then there was that other time you put your hand on my leg. And then there was that other time I felt you kick me under the table. And I didn't know that I was telling her to be quiet. I thought when I had my hand on the small of her back, I was like, I can't wait to get home, right? You know, like, I'm like, message missed, you know, like, right? So we got in this discussion. Why? Because wrong perception equates to wrong direction. So how you perceive things. The people had misperceived God to such a degree that they're walking this direction, and they actually think that God is desiring to lead them into harm's way. They actually think that God has ill intent for them, and so it causes them to stop midway and go, I actually kind of want to go back here. And here's what's so funny about you and I, is that we will sit through a terrible movie just to get to the end to see if it has any redeeming quality. Right, come on, you ever sitting in a movie and you're like 50 minutes in and you're like looking at the person that you came to the movie with? Like, I hope this goes somewhere. Otherwise, we're gonna both waste like $50 and a couple hours of our life. But what's crazy is sometimes what keeps me in a movie is the movie's so bad. And I'm like, I wanna see how they're going to redeem this. I wanna see what the redeeming quality at the end of this is gonna be. And yet what's crazy is we'll sit through a mediocre, bad movie just to see the end, to see if it has any redeeming quality. And yet we will give up on God in the middle of what we're going through. And here's what you have to know about God. He always saves his best for last. So when you're in the middle of something, it's only because God's getting ready to show off. It's only because God's getting ready to go, hey, watch what happens when I do this. Hey, if you're in the middle of something, can I encourage you, keep going till the end. Keep going till the end. You will not learn what you need to learn. And so sometimes we have this false sense of who God is and how he works because we go, oh, God's led me into difficult times. Well, no, God led you into the middle and you turned around in the middle. You didn't get to the end. And so, of course, you thought you got to the end of the movie. And so I could see how you could understand and come to the conclusion that God has leads you into harmful places, but it's only because you pressed pause in the middle of the movie. Think about every movie you've ever watched. What if you stopped it in the middle before they, get to the part where there's the redeeming quality of the movie? You just stop and you're like, this is too painful, I don't want to go on. The reason why we stick with movies is because movies resolve. And God works the same way. We got to stick with God because God resolves difficult seasons. God resolves difficult moments. God resolves painful realities in our life so that we can get to the end and we can go, oh, that's what God was trying to do. What did we miss? I think sometimes we miss the fact that God brought us this far. God brought us this far. Come on, how many times in life have you, like with tears in your eyes, been like, I have no idea how I'm going to make it through this? And what happens every time? You're here. You make it through it. There's been all kinds of seasons where you're like, I don't really know. You're here, which is proof positive that God wants to carry these things out. I want to have the band come up because I want to finish at the end. Because this is a really fascinating part where Moses and Aaron and Caleb and Joshua get to. It says, then Moses and Aaron, they fell on their faces before the assembly of the congregation of the people of Israel. And Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, who were among those who had spied out the land, they tore their clothes and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, the land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. Now, if you're Moses and Aaron in this scenario, you got to feel like you tried everything. Like if you're Moses and Aaron here, you got to feel like, man, we've been trying everything. It's like, these people walk through the Red Sea. They're frustrated. They pray. Water, comes from a rock. Bread comes from the sky. Like, they got to be so frustrated. They got to feel like, did we miss something? Like, have these people not seen what God has done? My nights end pretty much the same way. About 95, 97% of the time. My nights end with a big glass of milk, a king-size Reese's, and The Office. Pretty much every night, that is how I go to bed, okay? That is how I fall asleep. That's what tucks me in pretty much every night, okay? And something happened about a month ago that just blew my mind. So I had my nighttime routine, went and got my Reese's, went and got my milk. Christina was asleep. I'm ready to turn on The Office. And before I turn on The Office, I get to the part where it kind of has the synopsis because I pick shows. Sometimes I go through chronologically. Sometimes I mix it up and do my favorites, kind of all over the place. But there's a part before you press play where it's kind of the synopsis of the show where there's a rating system for the show. And so there's like 5 stars, and people that have watched the show on Netflix rate the show. And so I'd never seen it before. I'd never seen it. It was like a month ago, and when I saw it, it rocked my world. I saw it, and I was like, what? And when I saw it, the reason why I was so rattled is because The Office had 3 stars of 5 available stars. And I thought, I want to meet the man that would dare watch a few episodes of The Office and have the nerve, dare I say, audacity, to give it a 3-star. Who do you think you are? And I couldn't believe it. Because I'm watching this and I'm like, this is the greatest comedy in the last 25 years. Who would watch this? And give it that sort of rating. I was dumbfounded to the point where I'm like, am I missing something? Like, are we not watching the same show? Like, I'm confused. Like, this is comedic brilliance. I was so confused. And think about Joshua and Caleb. They go spy out this land. And they're looking around and they're like, whoa, is that even real grass? Like, that looks like astroturf. That's real grass manicured like that. And they're walking around and they're like, oh my goodness, like look at the fruit. The fruit is the size of our heads. This is insane. This is incredible. This is amazing. And they're walking around and what's funny is they probably thought all the other guys thought like them. Because sometimes when you're a faith-filled person, you're shocked when people aren't as faith-filled as you. And I could see them going down to Moses and Aaron and they're like skipping. They're like, this is amazing. And right before they're getting ready to open up their mouth and give this amazing report, the other 10 guys are like, oh, hey, We got to find a new spot to build the new development. This is not going to work. This isn't good land. In fact, everything that those guys saw was what? They saw what couldn't be. They saw the obstacles. They saw the giants. They saw the high walls. And I wonder if Joshua and Caleb were like, whoa, hold on. Did we see the same land? Like, did I miss something? All I saw was possibility. All I saw is what could be. The only thing I saw was land flowing with milk and honey. That's what I saw. And here's what you have to know about promised land. It always comes with a fight. It always comes with a fight. Like when they went there, they were shocked that people were there. Of course they were there. It's the promised land. If you want to build your house in a desert, let me just tell you, there won't be anybody there. Why would they want to be? But here's what I know to be true, and you know this too, is that the better the land, the more worth the fight. The better the land, the more worth the fight. Let me ask you this. Is it hard to have a good marriage? Yes, but the land is good on the other side of the fight. Is it hard to raise kids? Yeah, some of you, your parents, you can't even say yes. You just look at me like, is that hard? Yes, but the land is good. Is it hard to have great friendships? Yeah, but the land is good. Purity, is it hard? Single people, it's impossible. But the land is good. Greater the fight, greater the land. And what you and I got to come to the reality of going, I'm willing to go through the fight. I'm willing to go through it. I'm willing to endure. I'm willing to see it through. I'm not going to be intimidated by reports. Reports are not results. Reports are reports. I'm not going to be intimidated by that. I'm going to know that God has done it before, and I know he can do it again. And I'm going to believe with everything that I have that I know the land is good, and that's what God is calling me into. Come on, let's stand to our feet today, Grace City Church.